there is an entity out there. There's some kind of non-human intelligence that's living with us on the planet.
Those were the words stated by Jim Semivan, a former CIA agent in 2022. And if he's correct, if the intelligence behind unexplained aerial phenomena is already here, operating beyond our perception and beyond the reach of our defenses, then humanity may be facing something far more disturbing than visitors from another world. Because while extraterrestrials would have to find us, ultraterrestrials may have been here all along. The location was Iraq. The year was 1924, and the date marked the beginning of a century-old, seemingly supernatural mystery that has never been solved. While Iraq was under British occupation, Flight Lieutenant William Day and Pilot Officer Douglas Stewart were ordered on a routine surveillance mission over the desert that was only supposed to last a few hours. They never returned. Their plane was discovered just a few hours later, safely landed with minimal damage and enough fuel for the return journey. Extra clothing and water supplies were even still inside, but the pilots were gone. And apart from the landing marks, there were no tracks leading to or from the plane. Only two sets of footprints, side by side, leading away from the aircraft for 40 yards that suddenly stopped, as if both men had simply been snatched out of existence. So what could have happened? With their desiccated remains found months later miles from their aircraft, celebrated author and legendary researcher on the occult, Charles Fort, added the doomed pair to a string of other unexplained mysteries he had been chronicling at that time. One theory that has since gained popularity was that the two were abducted by something not human, but likely aerial. In 1971, author John Keel coined the term ultraterrestrials, non-human intelligences that were not necessarily visitors from space, but beings native to Earth. So could the two pilots have been taken by one? Well, it's a theory. Whether extraterrestrial or ultraterrestrial, the implications are equally disturbing. In light of the 2026 government disclosure on unexplained aerial phenomena, and a historic legacy stretching from possible abductions in the 1920s to aerial dogfights in the modern day, what chance does humanity really have against a phenomenon that can seemingly snatch humans from Earth at will and outmaneuver our most advanced technology? You see, here in the Middle East over the last 50 years, authorities have repeatedly encountered phenomena they cannot explain. Some incidents were considered so serious that neighboring Kuwait, decades before the US publicly admitted to the possibility of an alien threat, established an official government committee for the sole purpose of investigating extraordinary phenomena, making this mystery much bigger than the two pilots who vanished decades earlier in the desert of a neighboring country. Because whatever information the United States is disclosing in 2026, the evidence gathered from other Middle Eastern governments years prior suggests that the world may not be ready for what's coming.
I am, sir, aware of the reporting that biologics have been recovered.
Was anything described as that we have possession of bodies?
Yes, yes.
We have is it multiple types of creatures, or?
Sir, I couldn't answer that. I can tell you anecdotally that it was discussed quite a bit when I was at the Pentagon. The problem is the supposed collection of these biological samples occurred before my time, in fact, before I was even born.
Has there been any, to your knowledge, any communication with a non-human life form?
Humanity may be facing a security threat so huge, world governments have kept evidence of its existence hidden for decades. The problem is, they don't exactly know what that threat is, nor even where it originated from. Is it extraterrestrial, or could it be ultraterrestrial, meaning from our oceans, our past, our future, or even an adjacent reality or parallel universe? We don't yet know for sure. But on May 8th, 2026, something happened. For the first time in history, via an initiative known as Pursue, over 320 government files documenting more than 400 UAP incidents across nearly 8 decades were released to the public, over a period of 2 months, with notable incidents across the Middle East. Although critics state that much of this info was already available to the public via other government channels, what makes the May release noteworthy for us in the Middle East is the inclusion of the United Arab Emirates and Syria, countries typically left out of any global discourse concerning unusual aerial phenomena, but important nonetheless. According to the released government files, the first notable incident took place over Syria 5 years ago, where a filmed object executed what military analysts described as instant acceleration, going from stationary to extreme speeds with no visible propulsion event nor sonic boom. The second instance took place in Iran 4 years ago, where 4 anomalous objects were observed flying in tight, synchronized formation with no obviously visible propulsion system, no exhaust, no rotors, and no heat signature consistent with conventional engines. The third instance is the most spectacular. On June 2024, footage captured by a U.S. military aircraft over the Emirates showed an object described as looking like an inverted teardrop, traveling at an extreme velocity. 5 months earlier, a similar, if not the same craft had been spotted over Greece. While an initial report described it as diamond-shaped, the raw frame-by-frame sensor breakdown reveals that the UAP closely resembles the same inverted teardrop, with a distinct trailing mass suspended beneath it. It was clocked traveling at an astonishing 434 knots close to the ocean surface. The most logical explanation would suggest that if all 4 instances were not regular drones, they likely match objects that fit the operational profile of an undisclosed electronic warfare or stealth reconnaissance technology rather than an interplanetary non-human spacecraft. And while that explanation works perfectly well today, where we possess technology that only a decade ago would have seemed like science fiction, this same logic cannot be applied to similar encounters going back to the 1980s and earlier. The flight and visual characteristics of objects like the teardrop simply cannot match the technological profile of any human-built machine from those periods. Yet similar incidents were still recorded and classified by both regional and international governments.
All the witnesses possessed scientific competence and broad knowledge. They said it was as big as a jumbo jet, cylindrical, with a huge dome and flashing red light. After 7 minutes, it took off without a trace. If so, it was the first UFO ever sighted in Kuwait.
Before we had the technology to even fly, the default explanation for any object not a bird capable of suspending itself in the air, let alone travel at tremendous speeds, would have been classified as a jinn, at least here in the region. In the Muslim world, the term jinn is often, and admittedly lazily, used as shorthand for anything seemingly anomalous that cannot be logically explained, even when that is not the case. However, when we're talking unexplained aerial phenomena, the term ultraterrestrial could actually very aptly apply here, implying visitors from another dimension and not another world, like the jinn. These same entities have also traditionally been associated with mysterious disappearances or abductions reported across the region for centuries, akin to the 1924 case in our cold open. If that is the case, are they really from a different plane of existence, manifesting in our realm in different forms, or are they from a different point in history? Different academics and folklorists have competing ideas that are not all mutually exclusive. Speaking on the Joe Rogan podcast, Dean Radin, an American parapsychologist, has a novel take on some of these entities.
I'm a fan of Hal Puthoff's ultra-terrestrial idea. that these are not from the future, they're from the past. They just happen to be way more advanced than we thought. And like, how far in the past? 100,000 years? Maybe 1,000,000.
This, to some extent, is consistent with the Anunnaki theory. Many who believe the phenomenon is real but do not believe in aliens may view the Anunnaki, pre-Islamic deities from Gulf mythology, as spiritual entities that existed among humans. More materialist interpretations, however, lean back into the extraterrestrial theory, famously championed by the discredited Zecharia Sitchin in the 70s, and platformed today by celebs and even government ministers.
وربما حتى قسم كبير من الناس اللي في محافظة ذي قار لا يعلمون أن أول المطارات التي أنشئت في كوكب الأرض قبل 5000 سنة قبل الميلاد أنشئت في ذي قار، واللي ما يصدق يقرأ كتاب المؤرخ الكبير المتخصص في الدراسات السومرية زكريا سينشن.
Followers of Sitchin's basic hypothesis believe that these beings were real and were an advanced extraterrestrial race who visited Earth several millennia ago. But regardless, whether they are extra, ultra, or just terrestrial, they still represent tangible security threats to the region's airspaces. Which is why, in 1979, when Kuwait became ground zero for many such anomalies, the Kuwaitis did something very few governments, then or even today, would do. They established a public committee within the Kuwait Institute for Scientific Research to get to the bottom of the phenomenon, taking groundbreaking steps to address a problem that wouldn't be taken seriously by the rest of the world for another 50 years. Becoming the first known country in the Middle East, and one of a handful of nations globally by the 1970s, to openly admit that the UAP phenomenon is an actual potential threat.
It was as big as a jumbo jet, cylindrical, with a huge dome and a flashing red light. After 7 minutes in a Kuwaiti oil field, it took off without a trace. This was the statement released to the media by Kuwaiti Security Chief Brigadier Mohammed al-Hammad. According to declassified documents recently released online, Brigadier Hammad's statement to the media was just one of several references to unexplained events that took place in Kuwait between 1978 and 1980. In late 1978, in the region of Aish, an anomalous object was encountered in an oil field by 7 Kuwait Oil Company technicians. What exactly they encountered that day remains a mystery. The team had initially been instructed to drive out of the oil field since communications with unmanned refinery stations there had been lost. Newspaper reports and official government documents would later state that as the team approached the site, their car would shut down without any explanation, forcing them to continue the rest of the journey on foot. Once at the field, they would quickly realize that it was not just their car that had stopped working, but everything in the area had ceased functioning. No machines, telecommunications, or anything else that was capable of generating an electromagnetic pulse was functioning within the vicinity of Aish. But this was not the strangest thing the team encountered that day. As they approached the station, they would observe an extremely large cylindrical object the size of an airplane, hovering stationary and completely silent above one of the pumps. Stunned and confused, they naturally assumed that this object was in some way disrupting all electrical energy in the area. However, with no working vehicles on site to allow them to quickly leave, and all communications in the area down, the team had no choice but to simply observe the anomaly for the several minutes it was there, before it began to violently shake and shoot up in the air, quickly vanishing from sight. And while just one encounter like this could eventually be dismissed as an unsolvable mystery and forgotten, an investigative committee from the Kuwait Institute for Scientific Research, or KISR, eventually uncovered a total of 7 other similar instances that had taken place across the country between the 7th of November and the 14th of December.
Initially, the committee examined the oil field, while the police and military assisted with an extensive ground search, with investigators finding no physical trace of the reported object. But this was just the beginning. Mufon writes that a marine biologist working with the organization confirmed with them that his employers weren't only investigating this anomaly, but a second instance that had appeared above an oil field 10 kilometers away. Here, an object reportedly flew above a water tower approximately 20 feet high and remained in the area for around 30 minutes. Long-distance communications were again disrupted, although the installation's internal telephone system continued functioning, allowing employees to contact their supervisor, who arrived quickly enough to witness the anomaly himself. This time, photographs were reportedly taken, but these and the results of their examination were never made public. On January 23, 1979, the committee held a press conference. Despite the skeptical framing some news outlets have since given the cases, officially the committee said that it could neither confirm nor deny that unidentified flying objects had appeared over Kuwait. They rejected the theory that the objects were foreign espionage devices, but did not conclusively reject an extraterrestrial explanation. Ultimately, the Kuwait Institute for Scientific Research recommended that Kuwait take every possible measure to protect its airspace, territory, and oil resources from possible terrestrial or even extraterrestrial threats. While the Oilfield encounters appear more technological than supernatural, a case later documented by the CIA reportedly occurred just weeks later and bore the hallmarks of an ultraterrestrial manifestation, a massive 16-kilometer-wide atmospheric entity.
The Kuwait Ministry of Interior launched an investigation concerning a report submitted by a Kuwaiti airport pilot and a director of operations who goes by the name of Mr. Shamlan. In this report, it states that he encountered an unusual light phenomenon on the evening of June 20th of 1980 when flying in from Cairo. In his report, he states that during flight KU 542, as they were approaching Kuwait International Airport at 15,000 feet, him and his crew saw an extremely huge ball of light moving towards the northwest of Kuwait City, traveling at the same height and speed as them. According to the US State Department's report on the matter, the crew estimated that the size of the sphere was an incredibly large 10 miles in diameter. The anomaly was observed directly north of a populated district called Wafra, and unfortunately, this is where Mr. Shamlan's story seemingly falls apart, at least on the surface. After Kuwaiti authorities launched an investigation into the incident, it became apparent that no one on the ground reported seeing the anomaly in the sky. Perhaps it was due to its high altitude and the thick layer of haze above the city at that time that prevented people on the ground from noticing. However, considering it was 10 miles in diameter, at least one person on the ground should have noticed its appearance. Furthermore, Kuwait Air Traffic Control also did not pick up anything on their radar, and unlike all the previous encounters, there were no electromagnetic disturbances reported in the area that caused any mechanical disruptions. Therefore, could the crew of flight KU 542 be lying about the anomaly, or were they simply confused about what they saw? Well, no, neither. At exactly that same time, at a distance of 90 miles from Kuwait City and approaching from another direction, Kuwait Airlines flight KU 708, arriving from Khartoum, Sudan, also reported to air traffic control that they were observing a giant ball of light that was invisible to their radar and was rapidly approaching the city. Although the object eventually disappeared from view with no physical proof of its existence being left behind, the fact that two separate civilian aircrafts, hundreds of kilometers apart, simultaneously reported an encounter with the same anomaly makes it clear that something profoundly unusual was dominating the skies that night.
Now, all of this information has been publicly available for years, not only in Kuwait's legacy media from that era, but also across the country's modern social media and in declassified US intelligence files that can be found online. And while these two instances, the Oilfield encounters and the 10-mile-wide entity, were vastly different, they do demonstrate one key point. It seems difficult to definitively state that we're dealing with only one type of phenomenon. The two Oilfield encounters were technological, while it could be argued that the Kuwait Airlines anomaly appeared almost spiritual. And not just in Kuwait, but throughout history worldwide, there seem to be examples of both occurring, sometimes almost simultaneously. Recently, the US Department of Defense had to acknowledge a leaked video of an alleged UAP, which some are calling a jellyfish, first spotted at a US operations base in the region back in 2018. The somewhat ghoulish entity, while appearing mechanical due to its smooth, controlled flight, could be argued to be organic due to its form, since it does not traditionally resemble a standard UAP or any known terrestrial vehicle. But that's just an opinion. While the majority of confirmed documented aerial phenomena above the region that could be classified as either extra or ultra-terrestrial come from the massive influx of US military surveillance equipment after 2003, there were also the Kuwaiti cases of the 70s and 80s, as well as notable encounters right across the region and beyond, over what was once known as Mesopotamia, and even further south, with newspaper reports from that era chronicling several encounters above the Emirates. But none of these encounters has garnered more attention than a historic anomalous event that occurred in 1976. By the time KISR launched its investigation, one of Kuwait's nearest neighbors had already encountered a similar, if not the same anomaly that appeared in its oil fields, which was also capable of disrupting electrical devices. This prior case was, of course, the infamous Tehran UFO incident, perhaps not only the Middle East's most famous military encounter with a UAP, but one of the world's. But what a lot of people miss in the retelling of this case study is that the UAPs in this instance exhibited evidence of both extraterrestrial and ultraterrestrial manifestations. Most people already know the basics of the story, in which, during the early morning hours of September 19, 1976, citizens of the Shamiran district reported seeing mysterious glowing objects in the sky, leading authorities to scramble two F-4 interceptors, which unsuccessfully attempted to engage the craft and momentarily found their equipment malfunctioning upon contact. But what is less commonly reported are the events that occurred just before and concurrently with the interception, as well as those that followed the next day. In the hours and even minutes before the F-4s were scrambled, reports of an intense wave of sightings had already flooded authorities in Morocco over 7,000 kilometers away. Between 1 and 3 a.m. local time that same day, thousands of witnesses across Morocco, including police officers, airport workers, and military personnel, reported seeing a massive, luminous, cylindrical, or tube-shaped object, followed by silver glowing spheres, traveling silently across the night sky. With a time difference of 2 hours between Casablanca and Tehran, that means both events in two countries at one time were occurring simultaneously. But an even more interesting detail comes from the coda that occurred hours later in Tehran. Because when the confrontation moved from the sky to the ground and began involving civilians, it also moved us from the realms of extraterrestrial theory to possibly a higher dimensional ultra-terrestrial encounter. According to US intelligence, the morning after the aerial encounter, the F-4 crews returned by helicopter to inspect the dry lakebed, where one of the objects had apparently descended. They found no wreckage and no identifiable craft. But as the helicopter circled west of the area, its equipment detected a conspicuous beeper signal, strongest beside a small farmhouse. The crew landed and questioned the people inside. They reported that during the night they had heard a loud noise and witnessed an extremely bright light, which they described as being like lightning. Despite the direction-finding equipment pinning the exact origin of the mysterious pulse to that house, searchers found no hardware and no debris. The trail going cold because investigators could not reconcile how what they assumed could be a physical emergency radio frequency transmits strongly from a yard that contained absolutely no physical radio equipment. Therefore, whatever was transmitting the pulse wasn't just invisible, it was as if it was completely out of phase with reality. To understand how a signal can pulse from empty air, we have to look toward the region's ancient metaphysical history and lore of interdimensional communication. and the grounded debate concerning the cosmic horrors that might be the source of these communications.
In a video posted to YouTube on May 29th, Monsignor Rossetti expressed his personal belief that many, if not most, UFO sightings are in fact demons.
In June 2026, the Roman Catholic Archdiocese removed one of its prominent figures over statements that directly linked UAP encounters, abductions, and other interactions to demons. This friction is at the core of what we are dealing with here, the natural or the supernatural. While the anomalous transmission given off by an intangible source seems to be an instance of advanced technology, the real question becomes, from where did this technology originate? Is it extraterrestrial or ultraterrestrial? The term ultraterrestrial is broader than simply identifying a phenomenon as an ancient cryptid race or the jinn of folklore, for example. It could even be what anthropologist Dr. Michael Masters calls an extraterrestrial intelligence, future humans returning from another point in Earth's own timeline. Therefore, despite falling under the same ultra-terrestrial umbrella, these beings might all operate under technological restraints. So, a future human civilization might build physical, time-displacing craft. A hidden ancient Earth civilization might possess propulsion and electronic capabilities far beyond our own. Or, much like the jinn, or an intelligence like them, operating from a higher dimensional environment, might require some kind of physical interface just to interact with our three-dimensional world. For now, we can only hypothesize. Yes, this is highly hypothetical, loosely applying fringe theoretical physics to a real-world historical event. But as a thought experiment, what the pilots perceived as a complete craft might instead have been a temporary three-dimensional cross-section of something larger. A manufactured interface projected into our environment, or a probe capable of moving between different physical regimes. In theory, such an object could produce light, radar returns, electromagnetic interference, and other measurable effects without remaining as a conventional machine that investigators could later retrieve. Incidentally, the Kuwait Airlines case is also compatible with a higher dimensional projection, because it resembled an immense luminous form temporarily manifesting in our world. Historically, any unseen intelligence temporarily revealing its presence through overwhelming light, sound, and physical disturbance would likely have been interpreted through the language of jinn. A modern military encountering the same effects through radar and electronic systems would naturally describe them through the language of machines and advanced technology. Those two interpretations are not necessarily describing the same being, but they may represent different cultural attempts to understand a phenomenon whose underlying nature remains outside ordinary human experience. What appears spiritual from one frame of reference may appear technological from another, so the farmhouse coda does not take us firmly from extraterrestrial to ultraterrestrial. What it does is expose the weakness of assuming that something behaving like a machine must therefore have arrived from another planet. So, in the air, the Tehran anomaly behaved like advanced hardware. On the ground, investigators found no hardware, only an unexplained signal and civilian reports of intense light and sound. After releasing its findings on 8 separate unexplained aerial instances, the Kuwait Institute for Scientific Research's investigations into anomalous phenomena seemingly became deprioritized. When those 2 Kuwait Airways crews encountered that 10-mile-wide anomaly months later in 1980, the investigation was not handled by them, but seemingly by the Ministry of Interior. This may suggest that what began as a scientific curiosity had been officially upgraded to a security matter. What happened after that, whether official interest ended, moved into the military establishment, or simply continued away from public scrutiny, is not clearly publicly stated. But what is an undeniable fact is that as of 2026, global governments are now openly addressing the phenomenon as real and not fringe. In our Kuwaiti case studies, one concern not explicitly addressed in this episode is, why would UAPs, if they are indeed alien, have any interest in oil fields when they seemingly possess means of propulsion far beyond anything fossil fuels are capable of? This security concern, emerging in the midst of the 1970s Gulf oil boom, echoes similar concerns raised by the 2026 disclosure drop, involving aerial phenomena observed around nuclear facilities despite exhibiting technology that appears to far exceed nuclear power. So what do these assumed non-human intelligences really want, and why might they care about humanity's progression in energy? Well, in the US, when whistleblowers and government officials use the broad term non-human intelligence, or NHI, rather than simply aliens, the terminology deliberately leaves the door open to possibilities beyond extraterrestrials. The Seoul Foundation, a research institution composed of mainstream academics, philosophers, and former intelligence officials, would argue that automatically assuming an HI must be extraterrestrial is itself an anthropocentric bias, because sharing the planet with a hidden intelligence that may have evolved alongside us presents a very different problem from discovering alien life somewhere in distant space. In simple terms, imagine finding out that your house is not entirely yours. You thought you were alone, but a highly advanced family has been living inside the hidden crawl spaces and walls for generations. They are smarter than you. They can move through your rooms without being seen, and they have been watching you the entire time. That is why this idea is such a massive deal. It completely changes the conversation from a distant space mystery into an immediate crisis. At the core of this episode is the question of how different nation-states respond to a security issue when the potential threat is technologically more advanced than us in almost every conceivable way. A distant extraterrestrial civilization still gives us the psychological comfort of distance. They come from somewhere else. But if another intelligence already exists somewhere else on Earth, or occupies a parallel dimension right beside us, then there is no distance between us. They are already past all of our military defenses. This makes them a far greater security puzzle for governments, and makes the question of how such a possibility could ever be disclosed to the public even more complicated. With prominent Western media figures to former CIA officers and even the US Vice President publicly voicing concerns of what true disclosure could mean, it might entail world leaders having to admit that an equivalent or more advanced civilization, either hidden on Earth or next to our reality, exists. So from a military and political perspective, the philosophical question for the public becomes, if they have always been here and have the ability to outmaneuver our own technology, even remaining invisible to it, where does that leave us humans on the food chain? That could create a far greater psychological shock to human society. Although, on a side point, within Islam we have already been primed to believe in an unseen civilization living adjacent to us through the concept of the jinn. This kind of theoretical government disclosure would therefore only change the parameters of a quote-unquote jinn civilization from spiritual to technological. And although the Quran states that jinn are created from smokeless fire or a scorching wind, and are therefore generally understood as non-corporeal beings capable of temporarily materializing or interacting with our physical world, a theoretical government disclosure stating that these beings utilize physical craft, exotic metallurgy or metamaterials, and advanced biological engineering would not necessarily be contradictory. From the perspective of purely speculative quantum mechanics and theoretical physics, if jinn are theoretically higher dimensional, then what may seem spiritual to us could simply be technological to them. What we perceive as magical or spiritual from our three-dimensional perspective could simply be everyday engineering, geometry, and technology for a being operating from a higher dimension. So when Arthur C. Clarke wrote, Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. We can also take this a step further by saying any sufficiently higher dimensional technology is indistinguishable from the spiritual. And this connects to a parallel track of scholarly discussion that also relies heavily on modern physics and the philosophy of science to address the interdimensional aspect of ultraterrestrials, historically proposed by Jacques Vallée and the aforementioned John Keel. Few researchers have spent longer trying to answer this question than Jacques Vallée. An astronomer, computer scientist, and early internet pioneer, Vallée approached the UFO mystery as a problem of data and pattern recognition. In the 1960s, he and his wife Janine began compiling one of the earliest digital databases of reported encounters, drawing on hundreds of Project Blue Book cases and thousands more collected from Europe. The more cases Vallée studied, the less convinced he became that a simple model of metal spacecraft arriving from another planet could explain them all. Some incidents looked technological. Others involved physical effects, psychological disruption, altered perceptions of time and reality, and strange echoes of much older folklore.
Maybe this phenomenon is playing games with us. If you read a good folklorist or a cultural anthropologist who've studied fairy lore, and Jacques Vallée pointed this out in numerous books. It's pretty much identical what the experiences were of the people experiencing these types of things with fairies, leprechauns, elves, sylphs, and those things, to what we're seeing today. The only thing that's different is the context.
Vallée began asking whether the modern UFO might simply be one expression of a much older and far stranger phenomenon. After 6 decades, he still refuses to claim that he knows what UFOs are. And that uncertainty matters here, because like in our Kuwait examples, what governments were dealing with did not appear to fall under one clean category. In the medieval world, people described spirits. In the industrial age, mysterious airships. And in the space age, spacecraft. This is, in different ways, the territory explored by researchers such as Vallée and John Keel. However, there is a major problem with all of this. While it can be argued from a theological perspective that UAP and other aerial phenomena could merely be shape-shifting spirits like the jinn or demons, even without the aid of technology, skeptical writer and researcher Jason Colavito argues that Vallée may have discovered not an ancient hidden phenomenon, but a modern story. His criticism is simple. Strange lights, supernatural beings, disappearances, cryptic messages, and unexplained objects all existed in older traditions, but they did not necessarily belong together. After 1947, newspapers, science fiction, and popular culture created a common language of flying saucers and alien visitors. From that point onward, radically different unknowns could be folded into the same category. Academic historian Greg Egigian makes a more neutral version of the same broader point. Unusual experiences have always existed, but the post-war era transformed the way believers, skeptics, investigators, and hoaxers translated them into the global UFO phenomenon we recognize today. If so, perhaps asking whether Kuwait's 2 cases were extraterrestrial or ultraterrestrial already begins with a false assumption, that they were 2 versions of the same mystery. That leaves us with 2 competing maps. Vallée sees recurring structures across history. Colavito sees culture drawing lines between unrelated points. Vallée asks whether the unexplained residue reveals a deeper pattern. Colavito asks whether the residue only looks coherent because we keep giving completely different mysteries the same name. As for this channel's rare personal take, well, I think our reality is vast enough to encompass ultra, extra, and of course just terrestrial sources. Based on the enormous differences between the cases explored throughout this episode, my own view is that we may be dealing with both ultraterrestrial and extraterrestrial intelligences as two entirely separate categories of anomalies. Some cases appear almost aggressively physical and purely technological, while others mimic classical hauntings and apparitions, but on a larger scale in the air or above our oceans. I simply do not see one explanation comfortably accounting for both. But what do you think? Given the range of case studies, scenarios, and encounters explored throughout this episode, are we dealing with ultraterrestrials, extraterrestrials, or both? Or even neither, making this a purely a human or natural phenomenon? But if we really are dealing with a non-human intelligence, and the governments of the world one day disclose this as an undeniable truth, how would it impact society? And more specifically, your individual culture and belief system? Would it challenge your faith? Confirm it? Would you believe it? Or would you think it was some kind of mass delusion? Sound off in the comments, like and subscribe, and inshallah, I will see you in the next one where we dive into the cross-section of where scholarly ancient Arabian metaphysics and simulation theory directly merge into a 2026 update about developments occurring at CERN.